Welcome to Ask eTech, our brand new series of video interviews with the talented members of the eTech Components team. This series is your opportunity to learn more about our expertise in power cable accessories and electrical components, as well as to get to know the people behind our Widnes-based company. In our pilot episode, we're excited to speak about Common Crimping Mistakes with Paul Forrester, our Operations Director and Elpress Crimping System Specialist. So, Paul, your journey in the electrical industry began as a student at the original BICC components offices in Prescott, now known as Prysmian, of course. This is where you gained valuable experience with crimping systems and cable accessories. What do you remember about those early years in the industry?
Well, everybody in the area worked at BICC. It was like it was part of the community. They had their own sports clubs, social clubs, all that type of stuff. My dad worked there, so it was a lot of people we knew worked in that area. And from my point of view, BICC was the market leader. You know, they were involved in cables, accessories, and they were the main go-to brand. It's where I met Chris Montgomery, the MD of eTech. So I met him actually. So he was one of the big sales, national sales managers of BICC at the time. And BICC went through a lot of acquisitions and change of name. So it went from like General Cables to Pirelli. And then eventually it was Goldman Sachs who created Prysmian, as it is today, the Prysmian Group. So Chris was the national sales manager, and I remember meeting him in the canteen. So I was a couple of spaces in front of him, and I think I ordered fish and chips, and I said, I'll have a pie on the side, and Chris did exactly the same. I think it was like love at first sight with that type of stuff. And then we just got talking in the canteen. And from my point of view, I was only young. I was what, 18, 19, a student really in the office, and to have like someone from a big corporation sat with me just chatting away, talking about football and different things, it was a real good experience. And then Chris would just he'd come in and he'd give me little tasks to do and bits and pieces like spreadsheets and stuff. And now I realise it's because he can't do spreadsheets. That's why he used to give them to me when he came in. So yeah, that was the early days back in.
Nice. So yeah, I mean, at the moment, eTech is celebrating our 20-year anniversary this July. So a big company milestone. I mean, eTech really has been your life, hasn't it, over the past 20 years? You know, you started full-time as a business development manager in 2004. Really, from the warehouse to boardroom level, you've kind of seen it all. Safe to say you're an expert in the field, right?
Yeah.
Would they call you that?
Well, yeah, I'd like to think so. I think the good thing for me is I have done everything within the business. You know, when we started, it was only there was only three of us. So, you know, it was important to really understand all the processes. So I've done things from warehouse picking, dispatching, parts of the accounts, sales, everything. And I think that really helps me now that I can go out and use my technical experience and sales skills, but then I understand the processes behind the scenes. So when I make a promise, I know how it works, so I know that promise can come through, So
Awesome. I mean, really, during your time at eTech so far, you've received advanced crimping training at the Elpress factory in Sweden, big partner of ours, Elpress, of course. This training included tool repair, calibration. I know you've also spent many years collaborating with major contractors on high demand projects across industries, you know, nuclear, oil, gas, rail. Tell me how the knowledge you've attained over the years has allowed you to train electricians and electrical engineers in the best crimping practices.
Yeah, so well, I love crimping. Like it really turns me on. That's the thing I'm passionate about. You know, so when I'm doing the presentations to people out in the field, you know, I've got the knowledge, and that really comes from certainly in the early days with BICC. They had the Bicon brand, the Bicon cable accessories, crimping. So I got taught a lot of the basics there. But then when we started eTech and we came to Elpress, so my original training was one of the guys from Elpress who was responsible for writing, or part of the team who wrote the IEC standards. So my early days was really sort of focused on those standards and the reasons why. And then Elpress themselves have a really thorough sort of CPD process. So there's a continuous sort of training that goes with that, learning all the different techniques as things start to advance. We looked at things like the transformer crimping systems. And then when it comes to some of the specialist training, we bring the guys over from Elpress over the years, and they've got involved, and I've been on the courses with them, and then I've advanced my knowledge. So yeah, from my point of view, it's been that continuous sort of development with Elpress. And then as well, because we've been doing a lot of the training in different environments and different sectors, you kind of learn what's important to them. So when we look at nuclear, for example, a lot of things are around seismic. So we're looking at vibrations. So with the Elpress dual crimp system, that's tested with vibration resistance. And also then we talk about how the terminals should be connected with the bolts and so on.
So you know the nuances between kind of each industry and what's required for each, so to speak.
Yeah, so it makes sure that when we're doing the training, it's not just, death by PowerPoint. I know the pain that guy has. So when they're going to come with the questions and they say, yeah, but we do this, yeah, but we do that, I already know how we get around it and what we can educate them with.
Absolutely. I mean, I know from conversations we've had on a personal level before, it seems crazy to me that proper crimping training isn't in the electrical wiring regulations. I mean, it seems bizarre to me, as someone who's a bit newer to the industry. How worrying is that for you?
Very. It's been a sort of bit of a crusade for myself and E-Tech with Elpress in general. We've spoken to a number of people at the different bodies, and sometimes you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, but we're gonna keep pushing it. We've spoken to people, and one guy had said to me at one point, in their standards, it basically says if it's a snug fit, if the lug fits on the cable, it's a snug fit, then that's fine. And that's the people who are writing the standards. We've had. When we did the presentation to one set of people, they actually said, okay, so you're expecting every electrician to buy a new tool every time they have a new crimping system. And that's the barrier we come against.
So you've experienced a lot of kind of attitudes that you're trying to change, essentially.
That's right.
Trying to change the culture. So since proper crimping training isn't covered in the electrical exams, so to speak, can you tell us, Paul, what are some of the most common mistakes that people make when crimping electrical connectors?
I think a lot of the problem starts at the supply chain. So generally an electrician will go to its wholesaler or supplier, and that's where the lack of knowledge is at the moment, and that's no disrespect to those people because it's not in the wiring regs. So when they're asking for a crimp lug, they will just provide whatever they've got on their shelf. So we get a lot of mixing and matching. And then when we look back at things like the stepping up and down a size, so we have some companies that when we look at cables, we have class 1 solid, class 2 stranded, and then class 5 and 6, which are flexible and kind of extra flexible. Some manufacturers will tell you to step up a size. So we've got a 95mm flexible conductor and they're telling you to put a 120mm lug on it just so the cable can fit in. Because with a flexible conductor, there's more air inside it, so it is more spread out to start off with. So what you find is the installer then doesn't know, do I use the 120mm tool or the 95mm tool? So there's no system there. And what we want to get to is that if for example you did the crimp tomorrow, after I've trained you, obviously, I can come and not even speak to you and inspect that to the same standard as you would do installing it. So I need to be able to see that the cable is the same size as the lug and the right tool and die set has been used. Some other things that we come across really is that, it's a clear indication if there's a wing on the lugs, that would tell me that something's wrong. It's been over crimped in some way or a wrong combination. And what we find in the industry really is that people will just file those down and then tape it up. So we're reducing the current carrying capacity of the lug for one, but also you're making the modification. So if there was an issue, who takes the responsibility there? Is it the manufacturer of the system or you as a person?
Tell us what are some of the signs that a crimp connection might be failing or is not up to the standard?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult if that person hasn't been trained initially, so they don't know what to look for when it comes to the markings before, during and after. So that's one way of us identifying it. We've briefly spoken there about the over-crimping element of it. Okay, so when we over-crimp, we're going to damage the conductor inside, which then creates heat and potential fire. But one of the biggest things we find when mixing and matching is the potential for under-crimping. Mm-hmm. So you can almost crimp it 50%. It looks like it's done a good crimp, but there's no way for somebody to be able to tell that that's been under-crimped. Yeah. So we as Elpress, we publish what we call an end dimension. So the end dimension is the measurement from the top to bottom of the lug. That's published as a guide, and we also have a go no go gauge, which can slot over the lug. So with undercrimping, we've actually got too much air inside the terminal then, which will then create the resistance, which will create the heat, and then again potential fire. So undercrimping is probably worse than actually overcrimping.
But it's harder to detect.
It's harder to detect because all the signs are there's a deformation of the lug during the crimping. It will make a marking on it, and if you give it a tug, generally you're not going to be able to pull it off. But there's no way of actually telling unless you have that system in place. Yeah. And with the Elpress system, that's part of the QA.
Yeah. You mentioned fire there a couple of times, and I remember actually seeing this on the news back in 2017. Everyone would have heard of it, Grenfell. Following the investigations into that blaze, experts said it was down to a faulty electrical connection that started the fire in the first place. Was this the biggest wake-up call regarding poorly crimped connections?
Yes, and it's sad. It's really unfortunate that it takes such a tragedy like that to really give people a wake up. So when we've spoken to a number of companies, again, speaking to the governing bodies, that has been the trigger to try and get people educated. It started with a poor crimp connection, tiny little crimp connection in the back of a fridge freezer, which was actually a result of mixing and matching of crimping. But we want to try and educate people and improve the quality, and if we can do that and save disasters like this along the way, then that's our aim.
Absolutely, yeah. No, hopefully it never happens again. Speaking of Grenfell, down in London, I'm going to take you up north. Sellafield is somewhere you know very well. You're up there a lot, and I know you've previously visited Sellafield in Cumbria to share your expertise on selecting the correct crimp. Tell us, how do environmental factors like temperature, humidity, chemical exposure affect crimp connections? What are the kind of discussions you're having with those guys up there?
Yeah, so we spoke earlier regarding the seismic issues, so the vibration. So the Elpress system is, it's not only tested to the IEC standard, which covers mechanical and electrical testing, but we also have vibration testing. We also have a higher heat testing on the Elpress lugs, and also we have a corrosion test that we do as part of the whole Elpress dual crimp system. So we go over and above the actual standard, so we test to it, but then we also have created a patented system which allows us to meet those factors.
So we've moved downstairs to our in-house tool and calibration centre here at eTech HQ. Can you explain the importance, Paul, of using the correct crimping tools, or should I say crimping systems, for different types of connectors?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about systems, because when we talk about systems, that tool, die set, together with the crimp terminal, has been tested to IEC. I think the first things for us to think about really is the different types of cables. So when we look at copper, we speak about class 1 solid, class 2 stranded, class 5 flexible, and you can see the differences in the types of cable straight away. So even though this is a 95mm stranded and this is a 95mm flexible, physically the outer diameter looks bigger in the flexible conductor, but it's actually still the same amount of copper. It's still 95 square millimeters. Okay, so that's something we need to bear in mind when we're looking at our lugs.
Sure.
So Elpress have a universal range which is called the KRF, and that is suitable for all classes of conductor. So there's no reason to step up or down.
Right.
And the way we do that is that we make the lug slightly bigger, so the actual barrel of the lug to get the cable in is wider, which allows you to take both the stranded and the flexible conductor in there. Now, if we did that and we didn't make the barrel thicker, when we made the crimp, it would cut down and get wings and crack the conductor. So we also have to make the terminal thicker to do that.
Sure.
When it comes to systems, again, on the copper, we do hexagonal crimping. Historically, there was like a punch system or like an indent system, and that can damage the cable. So we find that hexagonal from the symmetrical crimping gives a much smoother impact onto the conductor.
I mean, talking about the longevity, you know, we're looking at the tools here, talking about the longevity and the time you've been within the industry, you must have witnessed the crimping technology advance massively within the 2 decades. What advancements have you seen that you've been particularly impressed by, and what are considered the best standard now?
Yeah, so if we just carry on with the aluminium, working towards that, because a lot of vehicle manufacturers, trains, are trying to move towards the flexible aluminium. It's lighter, you know, it's much cheaper than the copper. So Elpress have come up with the Dual 5 conception when it comes to the Class 5 aluminium. So that was a big issue within the industry. So that's something we've worked on. When it comes to crimping, we're moving much more towards statistical process control. So inside the tools here, a lot of the information can be downloaded. It's almost like the old crimp cards that you would have had where you said, okay, I've crimped 20 crimps a day on this, and you keep a record. All the information is stored on here. We won a major project in London based on this. So what we were able to do, rather than the installer doing a test crimp every 10 crimps, we were able to download the information at the end of the day and show that, okay, within this norm, these 50 crimps are all good. And if there was one outside of that, you were able to go back and check it and make sure that was
total transparency with data.
Yeah, it's a good QA system as well. So we're not adding to the cost. We're being proactive with the information, and that can be downloaded. You can actually see it attached to one of the machines here. On top of that, we've spoken previously about the Elpress dual crimp system. So the Elpress dual crimp system was brought to us as a concept by a customer who had issues with vibration, had issues with corrosion in their industry, and also they wanted to meet the electrical connections.
Sure.
So Elpress developed a patented dual crimp system which took the traditional hexagonal crimp and added in an indent in there, which is part of the process, which give it exceptional mechanical strength and electrical strength, but also met the criteria for heat, vibration, corrosion. So that's like the top level, the creme de la creme.
Sure. I mean, you've spoke a lot already about the correct way to crimp. You know, I want to know, how have you handled situations in the past where the best practices aren't being followed on a project?
Yeah, it is generally about training. You know, we need to get in there. We need to do the education. We need to put the onus onto the installers. You know, we've seen too many times where people will make a wing on a connector, or the strands will be missing when they're putting it inside the connector, and it's too easy to tape it up. Okay, so we need to put the onus back on there. So when we talk about training, one of the things we talk about is it's almost like a manual handling course. You hurt your back after that, it's your fault. So if you do the training, we know we speak to the senior management, we speak to the health and safety and say, look, let us train your guys, let us educate them. And often there's quite a lot of people we train who are not using Elpress system. And also, from my mind, that's fine. You know, they can carry on using the system that they're using, whether it's a competitor. But even though all the imagery is Elpress, it's still to the standards. We look at IEC 61238, which is the testing standard. But then in the UK, we have installation codes of practice, which are the BS standards. So you're looking at BS 7609 for the copper tube, BS 7727. You know, it's bedtime reading for me. A lot of people won't be aware of it. But we try and get that across. So all the things we do in the training is specifically around that. And that also includes the tool calibration and service. That is documented within those standards. So for me, it's about education. And when we've done the education, you know, it's been able to follow that up with the service and being able to support them on site when they have questions.
So speaking, Paul, of the training that eTech provides, one, what are the major takeaways that electricians, electrical engineers get from it? And secondly, are there different levels to that training? Is it a standard package? Take us through that.
Yeah, so I do different levels of the training. We can do like a basic introduction type training, so that tends to cover all the standards, all the information you need to know. We add on a small practical. We can do a bit more advanced. So if there's a specific type of crimping that you do, we do the toolbox taughts, we do the practical training. We try and do a bit of everything. Sometimes we bespoke it for that customer. For example, wind customer that we have only do aluminium and bimetallic crimping. So we specifically focus on that, and then we look at the actual installation and how that looks. From my point of view, I want them to take away from it that some of the simple messages, and it's their responsibility then to help raise that. You know, I want them to be able to identify what makes a good crimp, so they can pick up a lug instantly and see, right, okay, I can see the markings on here. I know who the manufacturer is. I know the cable size. I know what tool to use. I know the dies, and you see that straight away before they crimp it. And then also when they've done the crimp, I want them to be able to pick the crimp up and inspect a crimp afterwards to do the same. Okay, the cable size, the lug, the markings, what I'm looking for in a good crimp afterwards. And then use the tools that we give them. So with the training, we use these type of slide gauges, which tells you, you know, the tool you need to use, the die sets, and all the information. So that comes with the tool. But this is one of my best tools that we have. Really simple, really cheap, and this is to make sure that after we've checked all our criteria, making sure the cable's in the right place, there's no wings, we can check that it's not been undercrimped. It's the single biggest thing that people don't do, because normally you just give it a little pull, but we've got a go-no gauge. That goes over the lug, and we can walk away now from that crimp knowing that that's a
piece of mind.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's part of the QA system that Elpress employ within the system.
When people do want, you know, to take part in our training, on-site inspections, how do they go about that for interested viewers?
Yeah, so we've got details on the website. There's contact information on there. We've got details about the service and so on. They can contact me directly. Obviously, I'm very active on LinkedIn. You know, well known within the industry as well. But just get in contact with eTech via the website or on the phone.
Excellent. So last but not least, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to someone new in the electrical industry regarding the importance of crimping in electrical installations? So overall, your summary of why you're so passionate about it. Why is that bedtime reading for you?
Well, first of all, I'd tell them to contact me. That's the cheesy sales line over, yeah. But we've seen incidents within the industry. You know, like I said, Grenfell was such a big issue, and it started with just a small, tiny crimp in the back of a fridge freezer that caused such a massive event. You know, we look at that on an oil and gas platform, or we look at that at a nuclear power plant, or in a hospital. The consequences could be devastating. So it's all about education. It's trying to understand the systems and then using that knowledge. Where we find big issues is in the supply chain. You know, you can ask for all the things you want, but if the supply chain then provides you with something you shouldn't use, you've got to have that confidence to say, actually, I shouldn't be doing this, and it's your responsibility then to raise that quality.
Got you. So there you have it. I want to say a big thank you to Paul for sharing his expertise on crimping today. If you're not already following eTech Components, follow us today on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube or Pinterest. Simply search eTech Components and you'll find us on there. As for our Ask eTech series, stay tuned for more first-person insights in the near future.